Hello and welcome back once again. Today we're going to talk about self-hosting and two-factor authentication. So, two-factor authentication, or 2FA, or also sometimes referred to as time-based one-time passwords, TOTP, increase security dramatically. Authentication apps for TOTP are preferred, but even those SMS TOTP text messages are better than not using 2FA at all. Passwords alone are insufficient to provide adequate security. Passwords are compromised too often these days. Many self-hosted applications like Apache Guacamole, Bitwarden, Remotely, and Mesh Central highly recommend 2FA at installation. By default, Apache Guacamole makes 2FA a default. This makes sense considering the fact that Guacamole is an application that provides access to all of your other application hosts, and wouldn't we want it to be more secure? We want the best security we can get with self-hosted applications. So, 2FA in Gmail. Google has 2FA support for your Google account. You can turn on two-factor authentication. It works well, and it adds a layer of security. If 2FA is turned on in Google and you want to use Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, SMTP, you must use Google App Passwords. So here's an example of my account where I have 2FA turned on. And you can see here that it says that two-step authentication is on. And I have 7 app passwords granted on the account at this particular point in time. So Google 2FA applications. So when Google 2FA is turned on, you have to use app passwords instead of your normal Gmail username and Gmail password. Well, yeah, you use your Gmail username, which is your email account, but you have to use the app password as your password instead of your normal Google password. The reason for this is because with 2FA turned on, there's no way that your application could get a PIN code. Example, if you use Thunderbird or Evolution email clients instead of the Gmail web interface, you need an app password for your received mail, which is the IMAP server, and your send mail, which is the SMTP server. Another example would be printer scanner devices that have a scanner glass. When you scan a document, they want to be able to use SMTP to email the scanned document, and they need the app password if 2FA is turned on. So recently, in the last 2 months, Gmail SMTP authentication via app passwords has been breaking or unreliable at the very least. You can Google it, and a lot of people are having difficulty with it. So what's the problem here? Well, a large number of self-hosted applications rely upon the ability to send SMTP mail to end users. These emails are for anything from verification of accounts, password change emails, and even summary emails in the case of things like forums. Example self-hosted applications that need to send these types of emails would be things like Discourse, PHP Bulletin Board, Rocket Chat, Zulip Chat, and Nextcloud. So how do I configure email for self-hosted applications? Well, usually the application asks for SMTP mail information when you set the self-hosted application up. For example, PHP Bulletin Board looks like this. They have an SMTP section. You can see here that for Google, I put in smtp.gmail.com because that's the name of their SMTP server. I gave it port 465 because that's the SSL port for encrypted email. I use login as the login type as opposed to digest or something else. And my SMTP username is one of my aliases on my domain. It's vmsman@Scotti-BYTE.com, which is really just an alias because it really is a Gmail account. And then I put in my app password down here that was granted when I created the app password. So that's how the setup goes. But this isn't working right now very well, if at all. So what do I do if Gmail SMTP breaks? Well, we don't know why Gmail without passwords for SMTP has suddenly become unreliable. I mean, I've used it for a couple of years and never had any problems. My guess is that with the rising use of self-hosting, Google has somehow decided to limit authorizations through app passwords. I'm not sure what the cap is, but I can say that even my Thunderbird app password is no longer working, even if I grant a new one. A new app password, that is. Is there no solution? Well, yes, of course there's a solution. That's the whole point of this video. Email services like SendGrid and Mailgun have become very popular because of these limitations. And one of their main functions is being able to send SMTP mail. So I use SendGrid. SendGrid has an email web API and they have an SMTP relay. You will want the SMTP relay function. You create an API key with SendGrid for use with your application. So SendGrid, how do we use it? Well, SendGrid supports unencrypted SMTP on port 25, although most people wouldn't want to send their email unencrypted anymore, so port 25 is not very common. They also do encrypted using TLS connections on port 587, and they do SSL connections on port 465, like I had set up in my PHP bulletin board example using Gmail. The SMTP server for SendGrid is smtp.sendgrid.net. Yeah, I recognize their website is .com, but their SMTP server is .net. The username that everyone uses that uses SendGrid is API key. And the password is the actual API key that you're granted when you create an API key on SendGrid. So how do I get started? Well, first of all, you want to go over to sendgrid.com and you want to register for an account. You get 100 free emails per day, which really solves the problem for most self-hosters, I believe. You have to verify a single sender, which is one user email account at the very least, and that would probably be your Gmail account. And so then, therefore, if you try to use SendGrid with your Gmail account, it would work. However, I kind of recommend that you authenticate your domain instead, which is what I recommend. Authenticating your domain entails adding a couple of CNAME records for SendGrid, which they'll tell you at the time you go through the domain authentication process. And that way it supports sending email from any account on your domain as opposed to just one account that you verified. So SendGrid verification. To verify your SendGrid account, on your SendGrid account, you go to Settings, and you go to Sender Authentication. And that looks like this. This is the SendGrid screen. I'm logged in here. And you go down to your Sender Authentication under Settings. So you have to choose Settings first, and then Sender Authentication. And then they have the option to authenticate your domain and also verify a single user. And you can see that I've actually done both. So the next step is granting an API key. So you want to go to Settings, and then API keys, and then select Create an API key. You want to select Full Access, because that's the easiest thing to do, and provide a name. And then click Create and View. For security, you only get to view the actual key once. It'll give you a name that looks like the key later on and down the road, but it's not really the key. So if you lose that key, you just have to delete it and create another one. So the key is your password. So for example, here I created just a temporary one so you can see how it works. I created migrate test key, and I said I wanted it full access. You can read the descriptions of the restricted and billing access. And then I clicked on create and view. So here's what the key looks like. Comes up on the page and says API key created. For security reasons, we cannot show it to you again. And they give you this giant thing. It's got dashes and dots and uppercase and lowercase characters and all kinds of stuff. So you want to copy that because that's going to be your password for sending email from the applications. So using the SendGrid key in PHP Bulletin Board. You use, this is PHP Bulletin Board, and you can see that I've gone down here, and in this application, they require you to preface it with SSL, but it's got smtp.sendgrid.net, and then port 465, because that's what I use for SSL, and then login, which is the default type. I use that under when I was using Gmail. The username becomes API key, and then this password here is actually that super long API key that you just saw on the previous screen that we got in SendGrid. Okay, so that's about it there. My advice is to use 2FA to protect your applications whenever possible. But we want to enforce the use of 2FA for the user accounts for your self-hosted applications whenever possible, because it provides that extra layer of security for not only you, but for your end users. And then we want to use SendGrid API keys as a reliable way to send SMTP mail on behalf of your 2FA enabled Gmail account when app passwords become unreliable. And that's about it for today. Thank you for listening to this point, and please subscribe and like if you like what you see. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.